Hello everybody, and welcome to the second part of the King Crimson Iceberg. I loved all the support you guys gave me on the first part, and I hope this video lives up to expectations. If you didn't watch the previous part, then make sure you watch it now. This video should be part of a playlist of the series. Without further ado, let's get right into the content. Beat. Beat is the 9th studio album by King Crimson, released in 1982. It's the second of the 80s trilogy and is notable for being the first King Crimson studio album to have the same lineup as the previous album. The album is basically a homage to the Beat generation of the 1950s. These guys were basically hippies before hippies became a thing. They rejected the American Christian culture of the 50s and encouraged exploring different religious and spiritual ideals, taking drugs, sexual experimentation, and turning your back on consumerism. The movement was mostly literary, being spearheaded by authors who encouraged these ideals. With this in mind, let's get back to the album. Often considered the overlooked middle child of the 80s trilogy, does it stand up to the other two? Let's find out. The first song on the album is the famous Neil and Jack and Me, better known as the I'm Wheels song. The song references two Beat generation writers, Neil Cassidy and Jack Kerouac. It's funny, I'm actually in the middle of reading a book by him, Dharma Bums, when I started writing this entry. The song is Adrian Belew fantasizing about being able to travel with the two authors around the United States and Paris, specifically riding around in the 1952 Studebaker coupe. Supposedly, the idea for this song came about when Fripp saw Belew reading a Kerouac novel. He then left Belew a note saying, "I'm Wheels, I'm moving wheels," and told him that the Beat generation should be the inspiration for the next album. Neil and Jack and Me is interesting because it basically picks up right where Discipline left off. Remember in the previous layer when I talked about Belew and Fripp weaving time signatures in their guitar parts during the song Discipline, the last song in the Discipline album? Well, Neil and Jack and Me starts with the two guitarists playing the same time signatures, so it's like a proper continuation. The next song on Beat is Heartbeat. This song is named after a book the wife of Neil Cassidy wrote about their involvement in the Beat generation. The song is a typical love song, with the narrator talking about missing his lovers, Heartbeat, her soft hair, and the rhythm they made together. After that, we have Sartori and Tangier. The name was inspired by Sartori in Paris, a book by Jack Kerouac, as well as the city of Tangier, a city in Morocco where many Beat generation authors lived and set their novels in. Sartori and Tangier is a short but pretty funky instrumental, with a notable introduction by Tony Levin on the Chapman stick. Next up is Waiting Man. This is another typical love song, with the lyrics depicting exactly what the title says, a waiting man. It's about a man waiting to go home to see someone he loves, and this guy is pretty emotional about it, being driven to tears. Of course, beyond this, there are many interpretations of what exactly is going on. It could be a couple finally meeting after doing long distance, or a darker interpretation is that it's a man returning home from his lover's funeral, and is waiting for himself to come home, aka die, to finally be with his lover again. Regardless, the song is memorable for its groovy beat. Moving on to the next side, we have Neurotica. Neurotica is named after a popular magazine within the Beat community. The song starts off with howling guitar and launches into what I can only describe as a fast-paced news broadcast, describing various animals going about their daily life in a chaotic manner. It then calms down a bit for the chorus, describing the speaker lost in this commotion with nothing to guide him, before launching back into the news reporting style lyrics. And I think the chorus does a pretty straightforward job of describing what the song is about. It's about feeling like you don't have the capability or tools to thrive in society like the others. Because the song talks about the society of animals going about their life, but the main character says they have no fin, no wing, no stinger, no claw, no camouflage, basically no attributes to help him survive. Two Hands is yet another love song. Man, I guess I never thought about it before, but King Crimson has a lot of songs about romance. I never really expected that. I guess my favorite songs of theirs aren't the romantic ones, so I just never realized how many there were. The first part of the song has pretty straightforward and explicit lyrics. It's about a couple touching and embracing each other, fitting together like two hands. The interesting part of the song comes from the perspective of the singer, who describes himself as just a painting on the wall, watching from the foot of the bed. The wind is blowing his hair towards the couple, but there are no open windows in the painting. So yeah, there are two common interpretations of the song. One is that this is a guy jealous of the couple's love, and the other is that the guy is one of the two hands, but he doesn't feel anything beyond physical connection. Emotionally, he's just watching. I'm going to be honest, I have no clue what the "no open windows" lyrics is supposed to mean. The penultimate song of the album is The Howler. It opens up with a pretty loud and unique instrumental, living up to the howling mentioned in the name. The lyrics of the song are a reference to the 1954 poem Howl by Allen Ginsberg, which was very controversial and even banned in some places due to its explicit drug and sexual content, which of course would be viewed as obscene in the 50s, but that was par for the course for the Beat Generation writers. The general gist of the poem is that free-spirited people are outcast by monstrous industrial society. If you look at the lyrics of The Howler, it basically says that in an extremely summarized manner, describing the angel of desire and sacred face of rendezvous being forced to live on the fringes of the world, in dark alleyways and the minds of those viewed as lunatics. And we have the final song of the album, Requiem. This is an instrumental which consists of improvisation over a Frippertronics loop. It's definitely my favorite track of the album. The contrast between the ambient loop and the players themselves going wild with their instruments is a treat to listen to. The extended version, where it's just like 5 minutes of the ambient loop before anyone starts playing, is even better in my opinion. But honestly, it's not for everyone. I know some people who don't like the more ambient side of King Crimson's work. Requiem's controversial status isn't just relegated to the fans, however. It actually almost broke up the band. According to content from the On and Off the Road box set, Adrian Belew and Robert Fripp had a huge argument over the direction of the song, which led to Belew telling Fripp to get out of the studio and Fripp actually leaving, not showing himself to the rest of the group for around 3 days. While there was eventual reconciliation, there were worries that the whole situation would lead to the breakup of the band. The two definitely remained friends afterwards, as Belew was part of basically every subsequent King Crimson lineup except for the most recent one. Also, Beat gained them a Grammy nomination for Best Rock Instrumental, so its tumultuous production did end up paying off. Boz Burrell, Raymond Burrell, better known by the name of Boz Burrell, was King Crimson's bassist and vocalist for the Islands era. Prior to King Crimson, Burrell was a guitarist who played jazz and met Fripp as part of the big band Centipede. However, in 1971, King Crimson was in desperate need of a new bassist, and Burrell was brought on despite little bass experience. He stayed with the band for the recording of Islands, as well as live tours in 1972. After King Crimson, he's most notable for being part of the initial lineup of Bad Company. He continued playing in several other gigs all the way up to his death at the age of 60 in 2006, where he tragically died of a heart attack during rehearsal. Despite being such a brief part of King Crimson history, he is more notable compared to the other Islands-only band members because of how crucial he was in keeping the band together. Another member of the Islands lineup, drummer Ian Wallace, said that if Boz never had agreed to be the bassist for the band at the time, Fripp would have likely called it quits, and King Crimson as we knew it would have been done before some of their best work. David Cross. David Cross is one of the more interesting musicians to join King Crimson, given that he joined as a violinist. His most notable contributions to the band were with the album Lark's Tongues in Aspic and Starless in Bible Black, although he does appear on Red as well. While I'm not the biggest fan of Starless in Bible Black, Lark's Tongues in Aspic is one of my favorites from the band's discography, and part of what made it stand out so much to me was their use of the violin. Cross really did add a lot of unique flair to that era of the band. After King Crimson, his time was spent between traveling, theater, and playing with various groups. In 1988, he created his own prog rock band called the David Cross Band, which is still active to this day, with their most recent studio album, Ice Blue Silver Sky, being released in November of 2023. He's also done collaborations with other King Crimson members in the 2010s, including Robert Fripp. Gordon Haskell. Born in 1946, Gordon Haskell was the vocalist and bassist for King Crimson during the In the Wake of Poseidon and Lizard eras. However, for the former, he was only the vocalist for Cadence and Cascade. For Lizard, he did play bass and sing all the songs. However, Haskell was more interested in traditional blues music and didn't really like the musical approach of King Crimson, especially despising the fact that they distort his voice post-recording, seeing that as insulting to his talent. So he left the band after Lizard and spent the next couple decades honestly kind of struggling with his music career. Unfortunately, Gordon Haskell absolutely hated his time with King Crimson and was very vocal about this, not only because of how stressed he was, but also because he thought he wasn't being paid fairly. So yeah, dude was struggling for a bit. However, in 2001, he released a ballad called How Wonderful You Are as part of the album Lookout. This song was a huge hit and propelled his career to new heights, releasing more albums in the subsequent years, as well as an autobiography in 2006. Haskell sadly passed away in 2020. Despite his brief stint with King Crimson that he didn't particularly enjoy. Haskell's work with the band is appreciated, as Cadence and Cascade is a fan favorite, in large part due to the singing. The Power to Believe. The Power to Believe is the final studio album of King Crimson, releasing in March of 2003. The album is a culmination of the heavy metal and industrial sound the band had been experimenting with since the 90s. The album starts off with the Power to Believe 1, the first out of 4 parts. The song is short at only 44 seconds and only features vocals. They say, "She carries me through days of apathy. She washes over me. She saved my life in a manner of speaking when she gave me back the power to believe." These same lyrics are used again for all 4 parts of the Power to Believe suite. The voice sings them with this cool electronic filter. As for what I think the lyrics mean, I'm honestly not too sure. The lyrics were actually copied verbatim from one of Adrian Belew's solo songs called All Her Love Is Mine. It could be a metaphor for just how having faith in something, believing in something, can give purpose to one's life. The calm opener abruptly cuts to the second song, Level 5, an instrumental. In my opinion, one of King Crimson's best songs. They've always done heavy stuff since the very beginning, but they really nailed it with this one. You can almost feel the weight bearing down on you. It's very energetic and keeps the momentum going forward through its 7-minute runtime. There's this one part that's super satisfying to listen to. I can't really describe it in words, but the guitar goes like dun, 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 and it's just great. There is one aspect of the song that I'm leaving out, but that's because it'll be covered in a later entry. After this heavy piece, we go into a calm song with Eyes Wide Open. In terms of the instrumental, the guitar plays a soft, mild-paced riff with the drums often taking attention over the melody, as there is a good variety of percussion. All the while, the war guitar is giving the track the weight it needs in the back, sometimes spicing things up with some extra licks. The lyrics seem to be slightly sad, talking about how someone goes through a day anxiously approaching decisions and opportunities, but sometimes misses them, letting the day go by. But they still keep their eyes wide open, hoping to make memories of the next day. Next up on the album is Electric, which is another instrumental, but nowhere near as loud as Level 5. While it is a milder song, it does retain some heaviness through its fast-paced drums and gritty industrial war guitar playing under the dainty regular guitar. This song feels like a balloon, with a thin surface of calmness just barely stopping the heavy metal underneath from popping out, with holds sometimes appearing, resulting in heavy sections. However, it does end meekly, avoiding popping. Next up, we have Facts of Life intro and Facts of Life itself. Facts of Life intro is just around 1 minute 20 seconds of ambient strings before abruptly being cut off by staccato drums and guitar, leading into Facts of Life itself. This is another properly heavy song, very industrial. Sorry if I'm repeating myself with the descriptors here. The lyrics are pretty straightforward, laying out the harsh facts of life. The first verse talks about 6 billion ants crawling on a plate, where none of them give back as much as they take. Interestingly, when I first listened to this song, I thought it said the lyrics were 6 billionaires crawling on a plane, and looking online, others also thought this. Maybe it was implied through clever wordplay, and honestly that interpretation makes sense with the following lyrics about how they don't give as much as they take. The next fact is that just because you can doesn't mean you should. It then launches into the chorus, which is the line, "That is a fact of life," repeated. The next facts are that some of us build, some of us teach, some of us kill, while some of us eat. After repeating the chorus again, the final fact is that nobody knows what happens when you die. The song ends after repeating the chorus one last time. The next song is The Power to Believe 2, which is actually quite unique for the album as it's very inspired New Age music. The first couple of minutes are New Age ambience before some drawn-out guitar and bouncy bass tone enter the song. This is followed by a suite of exotic percussion, and the previous components of the song all merge for the final few minutes. Of course, in the middle, the lyrics from the first part of the Power to Believe song are sung, albeit a bit slower this time. The next song is Dangerous Curves, which is an instrumental like Devil's Triangle or Sailor's Tale. It starts off soft and basically repeats the same musical phrase for the duration of the song, while slowly building up to the intensity and adding a couple things, until becoming very intense by the end and abruptly ending. Although the ending part is not quite the case for the song, while it abruptly ends on an intense part, there is a payoff with the loud final notes being played after it and slowly trailing off. The next song is Happy With What You Have to Be Happy With, which instrumentally sounds like your typical thrash metal song. However, the lyrics are pretty clever, as the song is a comedy of sorts, with the lyrics singing about what that part of the song is in. For example, the first verse literally is, "And when I have some words, this is the way I'll sing, through a distortion box to make them menacing." This is followed by the chorus, which has the lyrics that I'm going to have to write a chorus, we're going to need to have a chorus. Of course, the second verse has similar meta lyrics, followed by another chorus. However, we're introduced to the true lyrics of the song, saying that we have to be happy with what we have to be happy with, obviously parodying the repetition and mundanity of most popular songs that the general population seems to be happy with. A pretty funny song that's always a treat to listen to. Next up, we have The Power to Believe 3, which starts off with some ambiance occasionally interrupted by distorted bass, before repeating the first two lines of The Power to Believe lyrics. It then launches into a slow-paced but loud instrumental, featuring screeching guitar, piercing drums, and heavy bass, before slowing down at the end. The final part is The Power to Believe 4, which is a 2-minute song completely consisting of soft, drawn-out synths, and of course, the lyrics we've grown all too accustomed to are sung at the end of the song, finishing the album the same way it started. For King Crimson's final studio album, I think it's a great cap. While the highlights of the album are the heavier metal parts, there's a lot of slower, softer ambience to balance it out. A lot of King Crimson albums play with this balance between heavy and soft, and we see with The Power to Believe that theme brought to its extreme, metal balanced with new age ambiance. It shows the evolution of the band really well, comparing it to the debut album released around 30 years earlier. Groon. Groon was a free jazz improv song initially released on the B-side of the Cat Food single. It's a fun piece, sharing the same whimsical tone as Cat Food. It's also quite dynamic, changing tempos and volumes, and it also has those intentionally out-of-tune notes thrown in to occasionally add a bit of flair. However, the more notable version of Groon is the live recording found in the Earthbound album. It starts off similar to the version on the single, but it ends up devolving into something a lot more experimental, to say. The live track is around 14 minutes long, compared to the single's 3 minutes. The first 6 minutes or so is basically the same improv as the single version, but then it goes quiet, with drummer Ian Wallace slowly building up an insane, almost 8-minute long drum solo. While starting off slow, the drumming quickly picks up the pace, soon becoming maniacal. And then around 10 minutes in, I'm not really sure how they even made this sound, but some weird howling and screeching was introduced, which also builds up over the course of the next few minutes to this ear-piercing level. You can't really distinguish anything anymore, it's just a wall of complete noise. The group does wrap it up nicely, but man, that was a whole ride. Of course, this is a very hit-or-miss track, with some people loving the free improvisation and creativity, while others just thinking that it's pointless noise. I personally stand somewhere in the middle. I can appreciate it, but I don't enjoy it at all. Due to the song's reputation, its silly sound, as well as the name itself sounding funny, Groon has become a meme in the King Crimson community, with people invoking it kind of like how the wider internet will meme on Morbius. P.J. Crook. P.J. Crook, full name Pamela June Crook, is a painter and sculptor. She pursued art since a young age, graduating from the Gloucestershire College of Art at the age of 20. She seems to enjoy painting interactions between people as her subjects, especially crowds. However, she does sometimes dip into more fantastical scenes. Despite these mostly grounded subjects, she has a distorted, surreal style of painting. This surreal style, combined with some unique composition, turned what would be a boring scene, like a bunch of people reading newspapers, into a visually interesting piece. Skipping through her life to the part relevant to this video, in 1996 she was a part of a drama/documentary called Rolinda Sharples, Painted Out of History. This was a short film which aired on this British TV network that only broadcasted to a small portion of the country, so it's safe to say that it's a bit obscure. There's certainly people out there who own a copy of the film, but information about it is hard to come across on the internet. The film was about British artist Rolinda Sharples, and it likely consisted of dramatic recreations of some of her life events, interjected with documentary segments featuring P.J. Crook, who would explain the historical context and importance of these events. Well, the actress who played Rolinda Sharples in this film is Toya Wilcox, wife of Robert Fripp. Toya and Crook both struck up a friendship after their time filming together, and eventually Fripp himself became friends with Crook, enjoying her paintings enough to purchase a few himself. However, Crook's paintings would also feature heavily on many of King Crimson's album covers going forward. The only studio album to feature her work is The Power to Believe, but most of her work adorned the covers of many live albums and projects. Honestly, I do feel like the art fits the music, with both being sophisticated chords covered by a layer of oddity. If you listen to King Crimson's live stuff, you'll definitely be seeing her work a lot. Court-Red similarities. Previous layer, we talked about how In the Court of the Crimson King and In the Wake of Poseidon were similar in composition and themes. While that is the most common comparison being made, there are similarities to be analyzed between other albums. Here, let's take a look at the similarities between Court and Red. Both albums have 5 songs, so it's easy to make a one-to-one comparison between them. The albums start off with 21st Century Schizoid Man and Red, respectively. The former contains lyrics while the latter doesn't, so there's really not a lot to compare there. However, both are fast-paced, loud, energetic starts to the album. Next up, we have I Talk to the Wind and Fallen Angel. These are both slower-paced songs with more depressive lyrics, with I Talk to the Wind talking about the singer's loneliness and Fallen Angel talking about the singer's lost brother. Next is Epitaph and One More Red Nightmare. These are both longer songs, both between 7 and 9 minutes long. At first, it seems like the two aren't related thematically, with Epitaph being a brooding, depressing song and One More Red Nightmare being more upbeat and comedic. However, the lyrics do provide a similarity. In both, the singers are having dreams of their demise. Of course, in Epitaph, the singer sees an unavoidable future of destruction, while in One More Red Nightmare, the singer is having a bad dream about dying in a plane crash, which he thankfully wakes up from. The similarity is there. The next songs in the album are Moonchild and Providence, both of which are long improvisations. And finally, we have In the Court of the Crimson King and Starless, both of which are Mellotron-heavy, long, epic songs with depressing lyrics. All in all, I can see the similarities between the two. Projects. In the late 90s, the members of King Crimson decided to split up into various smaller subgroups to do some improv shows, a process Fripp called Fractals. The purpose was to get the band's creative juices flowing, to hopefully come up with something through improv that they could then use for future studio albums. This did end up happening, as some of the improv in the first couple of projects led to concepts that would appear in King Crimson's final 2 studio albums. Each different lineup was given its own project title, with there being 8 of them. However, the definition of project is informal, so this number can vary based on who you ask. So, going in chronological order, we have the first project, Project 1 from 1997, consisting of Robert Fripp, Trey Gunn, Tony Levin, and Bill Bruford. Next is Project 2 from 1998, consisting of the same lineup sans Bruford. The next lineup is Project 4, weirdly enough, also from 1998. It's the same lineup as Project 1, except with Bruford replaced by Pat Mastelotto. Next up, we have Project X, also titled Heaven and Earth, from 2000, with the lineup being Fripp, Ballou, Gunn, and Mastelotto. While titled a project, it's technically not like the others, as the project was recorded in the studio by the 4 members, while the full band was recording the studio album, The Construction of Light. We finally get to Project 3 in 2003, with the lineup being Fripp, Gunn, and Mastelotto. Technically, this project first started in 1999, still after Project 4. However, the group had to unexpectedly play again in 2003, since while the whole band was on tour, Adrian Ballou got sick and had to sit out a show, meaning that the 3 of them had to improvise for the night. Next up, we have Project 6 from 2006, with just Fripp and Ballou. While there were plans for a Project 5, they never ended up materializing. Then we have the next project, which you may think would be called Project 7, and you would be right except for the fact that it was just strangely renamed to Jaksic, Fripp, and Collins, the 3 band members who were a part of the project. This got its own proper album titled Jaksic, Fripp, and Collins, A Scarcity of Miracles, a King Crimson project. While the album started off as improvs from the project, they were refined later, with other members like Tony Levin and Gavin Harrison contributing. Honestly, if you're going to be listening to one of the projects, listen to A Scarcity of Miracles, as I personally think is the closest thing we're going to get to a post-Power to Believe studio album from King Crimson. I find it a lot more laid back than most of King Crimson's stuff. It's a fun change of pace. And then the final project is known as the Crimson Project, featuring Levin, Mastelotto, and Ballou, as well as some other non-King Crimson members, being the only project not to have Robert Fripp. Calling this a project is contested, as it's more of a cover band for King Crimson rather than an improvisational exercise. However, it has project in the name, so I guess it's included. Despite their convoluted history, the projects are worth a listen if you've already listened to King Crimson's studio and live works, and want to hear more of that same sound. r/King Crimson Circle Jerk. As with basically every community, the King Crimson community has their own subreddits. Of course, the main subreddit is r/King Crimson, which is just a place for a more serious discussion of the band, including questions and posts about merch you got. The more interesting subreddit, however, is r/King Crimson Circle Jerk, which is a subreddit for memes regarding the band. This is actually a quite active subreddit, and the memes are pretty fire if I do say so myself. Despite the name, there's not really a lot of repetitive jokes, and they cover basically the entirety of King Crimson history. It's a fun subreddit, and you should definitely check it out if you're a fan of the band. Thela Hunjinjit's origin. I briefly mentioned this when talking about the Discipline album, but the song Thela Hunjinjit has a fairly interesting backstory. So the song itself is about gang violence in the city. As part of the lyrics, Adrian Belew had to play the part of a person getting mugged, so he said into the mic, "He held a gun against my head. This is a dangerous place. I wouldn't like to live here." However, the performance wasn't satisfactory, and Adrian Belew was suggested to walk around their studio in London to get inspired by their urban surroundings. So he obliged, and while he was walking around, he repeated those words into a cassette he was holding. However, he was immediately apprehended by an actual street gang, who surrounded him and interrogated him on what he was doing there and what he was holding. They took the cassette from him and replayed him talking about guns in dangerous places, and immediately assumed he was an undercover cop or something. Adrian was terrified, but eventually he was able to explain what he was doing and they let him go. After this, Adrian came across some actual cops who also stopped him and questioned him, as they thought he was a drug dealer. But he was able to get back to the studio without further incidents, and he told everybody else what happened. This explanation was recorded and was actually mixed into the final song. So yeah, in the process of making a song about being harassed by fictional gangsters, Adrian Belew was actually harassed by real gangsters, and the fictional lyrics and the real recordings were put together in the final song. A pretty intriguing story. The Great Deceiver is about Satan. The Great Deceiver is the opening track for the album Starless in Bible Black. It's a bit awkward talking about the song before the album explanation entry, but there are multiple entries about this specific song's meaning scattered throughout the Iceberg, so I can't really do anything about it. The most prominent theory about The Great Deceiver is that the song is about Satan. The biggest piece of evidence here is the name. Great Deceiver is a title often attributed to Satan, as it's believed he deceives people into committing sin. The lyrics may also support this upon closer look. It's undeniable they have some religious connotations. A couple of the verses can be said to be describing Satan. Take a listen. In the night, he's a star in the Milky Way. He's a man of the world in the light of day. A golden smile and a proposition, and the breath of God smells of sweet sedition. Breaking it down, the first line refers to him as a star. In the Bible, Lucifer is referred to as the morning star, which is actually the planet Venus, but it can be perceived as a star in the night sky. And in the day, he disguises himself as a normal human. He tricks people with a golden smile and offers a proposition. The breath of God smells of sweet sedition. He wants to betray you, but hides it under a sweet coating to lull you into safety. Now, there are a couple parts of this verse that are off. If you know your Bible well, you'll know that Satan isn't the only biblical figure referred to as the morning star. We'll talk about that in a later entry. Also, the breath is said to be specifically of God, not Satan. But we'll put that aside for now. Let's take a look at another verse. Sing hymns, make love, get high, fall dead. He'll bring his perfume to your bed. He'll charm your life till the cold wind blows. Then he'll sell your dreams to a picture show. This is pretty straightforward. Satan will seduce you and charm you, only to destroy your dreams and drag you down to hell with him. It's an interesting theory, but we'll talk about other theories about the song in the future. The King Crimson Barbershop. The King Crimson Barbershop can be listened to as a bonus track on the Three of a Perfect Pair album. It's a short, comedic, and self-referential song at just over 1 minute, meant to be a joke during live tourings. The song introduces the member of the 80s lineup as members of King Crimson and asks the audience to lay back and enjoy the music. The song ends with 3 semi-serious jokes, mentioning that they don't do encores, they don't allow photos, and that they won't play 21st Century Schizoid Man. The song is set up as an a cappella, sounding like the 4 members of the band are just singing this jolly tune. However, it's just Tony Levin singing it all. Of course, the song is popular as a meme in the community. I mean, it's literally just a parody song they made of themselves, basically. It also obviously shows that King Crimson isn't just a elitist, stuck-up prog band. They have a fun streak to them. Jacko Indiscipline. We've got a controversial entry here. If you remember, Indiscipline is a song on the Discipline album, and the original lyrics were just copied over from a letter. and Adrian Belew doesn't really sing the lyrics in the original song, but rather just speaks them a bit dramatically. People like this original version. However, with the most recent Rad Crim iteration of the band, Belew is no longer the singer, but Jacko is. And Jacko doesn't speak the lyrics like Belew did, rather he sings them, with a melody and all. While this may not seem like that big of a deal, this caused a huge controversy in the King Crimson community. Many people really did not like this change of the original song, saying that the melody of the words doesn't fit with the rest of the song. In fact, this version of Indiscipline is a common answer to the question of what is the worst King Crimson song ever. With Adrian Belew being as beloved as he is in the community, people thought that Jacko's version was disgraceful and disrespectful to him. Other factors also fueled the flames, such as the already existing feud between Belew and Fripp. It also didn't help that Jacko himself isn't really the most respected member of the band, with a lot of people calling him the worst member ever, and this performance only gave people who already disliked him another reason to continue disliking him. On the other hand, there are people who enjoy, or at the very least, defend this version of the song. After all, it was Robert Fripp himself who suggested Jacko change the original to fit his style better, and the whole point of the Rad Crim lineup was to reinvent how the older song sounded. And Jacko changed it to make his own because he knew he isn't Belew, and he could never do Belew's singing style. It's not worse, it's just different. Still though, most of the community believes that Jacko Indiscipline is awful. I personally do think that this version is vastly inferior to Belew's version, but I also do think the hate Jacko gets is way overblown. Frippertronics. I have mentioned this term before, but let's actually go in depth on what it means. Frippertronics is an analog looping system developed in collaboration between Robert Fripp and Brian Eno in the early 1970s. While it's likely they weren't actually the first to do this, this method was so uncommon that they were basically the first to popularize it, and I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't even know of the others who did it and just developed it independently. The method to Frippertronics is to physically connect two tape loops in between two machines, making only one tape loop shared by both machines. The first machine records the sound it hears onto the tape, while the second loop plays the tape, producing the sound recorded. Since both machines are using the same tape, this results in what is basically a decaying loop. Since the first machine will just record what the second machine plays, and it will put that sound on the tape, then the second machine will play that stacked sound, meaning that the first machine will record that stacked sound on top, and this process is just repeated. This results in an ambient-sounding, echoey tone. This is essentially the basis for a lot of ambient tracks and soundscapes, repeating loops of drawn-out tones that get distorted over time. Of course, Fripp used this a lot going forward, in individual projects, group projects, and even in King Crimson, such as in the song Requiem. Often the loop would be played as a bass to add improvisational music on top. Held Food. We've got another entry about the Great Deceiver, although this isn't about the meaning of the song. This entry is about the very first line of the song, beginning with Held Food. However, it's not these two words that are the subject of the entry, but rather the word that comes afterwards. This word is a very offensive slur that I can't say on YouTube, but it rhymes with maggot. Now, when the band was initially writing this song back in the 70s, it's highly likely that they did not mean any offense with this word. The word didn't even have the same stigma back then as it does now, and more importantly, it doesn't even have the same meaning in British English as it does in American English. While this word is a slur in America, in the UK it typically refers to a specific type of meatball dish. And considering that this word is preceded by Held Food, it's very obvious that the song is using this meaning of the word. However, it doesn't change the connotation the word has in the modern day, and while there's no controversy surrounding it, it has become an edgy joke in the King Crimson Circle Jerk community to refer to the lyric. While people used to just quote it outright, the mods of the community have since advised users to not use the word anymore, in a post that is still pinned to this day. Yet, a lot of people will just use the two words Held Food as a community inside joke, just hinting at that unintentionally offensive third lyric. Lark's Tongues Part 5. We've already talked about Lark's Tongues and Aspect Parts 1, 2, 3, and Part 4 will officially come as part of an album later down in this layer. However, did you know that there is a Part 5 to the suite? Well, the song Fractured from the Construction of Light album was initially supposed to be the 5th part of the series, but was renamed because the band thought it sounded more like a sequel to Fracture. However, Part 5 would finally release in the album after that. Level 5 from the album The Power to Believe is just Lark's Tongues and Aspic Part 5 with a different name. It was initially going to be named like the other 4 songs, but I think they just decided that Level 5 was a better title. However, the song has been referred to as Lark's Tongues Part 5 by the band. It makes sense. Level 5 does play with a lot of the same musical ideas of the other Larks, and like Parts 3 and 4, it shows how this iteration of the band applies those musical ideas to create a unique sound. I already liked Level 5 a lot, and learning that it was officially part of the Lark's Tongues and Aspic suite made me like it that much more. Giles, Giles, and Fripp. Giles, Giles, and Fripp is a band formed in 1967. While initially just Michael Giles on drums and Peter Giles on vocals, they were later joined by Robert Fripp on guitar, making the 3 founding members of the band. They were temporarily joined by Doug Ward, who played accordion, and vocalist Judy Dibble, as well as permanently joined by Ian MacDonald, who played woodwind instruments. The band released quite a few projects, most notably the album The Cheerful Insanity of Giles, Giles, and Fripp. However, their music completely flopped. Peter Giles ended up dropping the band, but Michael Giles, Fripp, and MacDonald kept going on. They brought on bassist Greg Lake to replace Michael, as well as Peter Sinfield. However, with one of the Giles brothers gone, the name Giles, Giles, and Fripp no longer made any sense, and they also probably wanted to leave the band's failures behind them with this new lineup. So the name Giles, Giles, and Fripp was ditched for the new name of the band, King Crimson. Of course, the band would sometimes reuse their stuff from the Giles, Giles, and Fripp days for King Crimson, with the most prominent example being its own entry later down the Iceberg. With the success of King Crimson, people interested in the band's history started expressing interest in hearing stuff from Giles, Giles, and Fripp, so their work would be re-released, and what would have been obscure music lost to history is now enjoyed by many people years later. KC50. In 2019, to celebrate the 50th anniversary of King Crimson, 50 singles were released, 1 per week. These singles showcased alternate versions of various tracks from the King Crimson discography, both studio and live. These can range from edits, different mixes, or just some of their more obscure live stuff. Each single was accompanied by a short intro from David Singleton, DJM co-founder and producer for King Crimson. I would highly recommend listening through these singles for anyone. I think they're all available on YouTube at this point, and it provides easy access for some great work that would otherwise fade into obscurity. There are a lot of song versions that I discovered from this series that I just straight up like more than the original version. Also, the David Singleton commentaries are some fascinating insights, and I personally enjoyed listening to them. John Anderson. John Anderson is a legendary lead singer of the prog band Yes. However, did you know that he worked with King Crimson too? For the titular track of Lizard, he is the singer that can be heard in the first part of the song, Prince Rupert Awakes. The reason for this was likely due to the high notes the vocals required, which would be tough for Gordon Haskell. If you listen to some Yes songs, you would know that John Anderson has quite the vocal range, and sings high notes quite often. Honestly, listening to Lizard now knowing this, it's pretty obvious that it's John Anderson, but before I guess I didn't know enough about Gordon Haskell, so I just assumed it was him. But yeah, this is another win for Lizard enjoyers.
For now, Prince Rupert's tears of glass make saffron Sabbath eyelids bleed, scar the sacred tablet wax on which the lizards feed.
Improvs. Yeah, I'm not really sure why this is its own entry, but King Crimson is known for improvising quite a bit, as I've mentioned before. While they do this a lot live, or with the projects, they also do quite a lot of improv in studio, with some improvisations becoming songs on studio albums. Fracture, Woo. At 8 minutes 26 seconds of the Fracture, if you listen closely, you can hear someone shouting Woo. The culprit is Bill Bruford, who is known to shout like this sometimes during recordings when he gets excited. This is acknowledged by the band itself, as DGM's website has an article about this specific whoop, and even offers an isolated drum track to hear the whooping more clearly. If, for some reason, if you want to hear more of these whoops, you're in luck, because believe it or not, there's an entire subreddit dedicated to it, r/Bruf's whoops. Never change, internet. Fripp is a control freak. So if you haven't already gleaned this from the various stories I've recounted on this iceberg, Robert Fripp is a bit of a control freak. This is because he's very much a perfectionist when it comes to his music and performances, wanting basically everything to go his way. I mean, I've already told a bunch of stories about how he got into feuds with his bandmates, pushed them to the limit, and fired some of them to fulfill his vision. There's a reason why the lineups change so frequently. Now, I don't think he's a psychopath or something, but he's very much values the music over his personal relationships when it comes to his profession, and his very straightforward, no-nonsense style of communication makes him look like a cold tyrant when he's being brutal with his bandmates. There are so many stories of former and even current King Crimson members talking about how much of a bully Fripp can be. And as we know with albums like Lizard, he will sometimes call his own band's music subpar if there are aspects contributed from others that he doesn't like. This attitude also bleeds over to Fripp's interactions with the community. There is a strict no-photograph policy that is implemented at each of their shows, and Fripp has been known for just straight-up stopping shows if he notices someone taking a photo. Yes, I understand the logic of not distracting the artists and just enjoying the moment, and the people taking the photos did break the rules, but punishing an entire audience by cutting a show just because one dude took a photo, ruining the perfection of the performance, is insane. Also, until just a few years ago, Fripp was stopping the music from being available on music streaming services or YouTube, wanting people to basically only listen to physical copies of King Crimson's work. Once again, he does have valid reasons for wanting this, but it still shows how much control he wants over the band and its work, considering that he didn't allow music to go on streaming when basically every other band has done that decades ago. Once again, in the past few years, we started to learn more about Fripp's personal life and attitudes, showing that he isn't really stuck up all the time, but he certainly is when it comes to his profession. I guess this is because he isn't really a rock star in the traditional sense. Ironically, despite being a prog musician, his attitude towards music performance is much more rooted in classical music. Similar to a professional orchestra, he wants everything to be perfect, and for the audience to just quietly sit down and pay attention to the players, who remain stationary and focused. Compare this to the more typical rock stars or singers, whose concerts are more about the energy and the party, with the audience cheering as the artists dance around on stage. Looking at it from this lens, it makes sense as to why Fripp takes the music so seriously, and it's honestly quite admirable in a way, although he definitely could be a bit nicer to the people around him. Mars. Mars, the Bringer of War, is a song that is part of Gustav Holst's suite's The Planets. In 1969, King Crimson would cover Mars during their live shows. However, they would stop playing it, likely due to some copyright issues. I was initially confused about this since Mars is a classical piece, but it's actually more recent than one might expect, with the Planet Suite being released in the late 1910s. This means that King Crimson was playing the song only 50 years after it was written, which would be like a new band playing 21st Century Schizoid Man today as a part of their shows. Typically, covering a song live would be legal as long as either you or the venue you're playing at have a blanket license. And even then, a lot of people just don't really care if you don't. But I'm not too familiar with the legal intricacies, and I'm completely clueless on how England in 1969 would approach this situation, but I guess there could have been some sort of legal issues there, which is a bit ironic considering the band's incredibly protective attitude towards their music today. However, it's entirely possible that there was no legal issues and that the band just moved on from the song. I'd assume they only covered Mars because of lack of original material at the time, and once they started building up their roster of songs and getting more comfortable playing them live, they didn't really have a need to play Mars anymore. Even listening to the live 1969 versions, it wasn't an exact one-to-one transcription of the original orchestral version, and they definitely added their own flair to it. This would culminate in the song The Devil's Triangle on the studio album In the Wake of Poseidon, which is clearly inspired by Mars but does justify being its own separate song. I guess the band's reliance on Mars in the early days resulted in all the slowly building repetitive instrumentals in future albums, so we have it to thank for those great pieces. Heroes. Heroes is a famous 1977 song from David Bowie. The song is about two lovers, one from East Germany and the other from West Germany, with the speaker expressing desire to be with the other, even though the heavily guarded Berlin Wall separates the two. However, it doesn't stop them from fantasizing about meeting each other, even just briefly. It's about the persistence of love, even in the face of overwhelming odds. However, the real story the song was inspired by was not as sweet as two young lovers surpassing borders to be with each other, but rather a married man who wants to be with his mistress. This is why the song's title is in quotations, as they're brave for expressing their love, but they're really not good people, as both of them are knowingly engaging in infidelity. But regardless of what meaning the song was written with, it has basically become an anthem for forbidden love in every form. To tie it to King Crimson, the iconic guitar in the song was played by none other than Robert Fripp, as the song was a result of a collaboration between him, Brian Eno, and David Bowie. Later, King Crimson would cover the song live several times in 2000. However, their most famous cover of the song would be the Radcrim lineup playing it in 2016. This performance was a tribute and celebration of David Bowie, who had, at the time of the performance, just recently passed away. This is an absolutely legendary cover of the song. It's just so tight and well put together, the sound will just envelop you as you listen to it. I know that we recently had an entry that painted Jago in a bad light, but his singing performance here is excellent. The emotion really comes through like the original. It is, in my opinion, the best performance to come out of Radcrim. And to make it even better, it was performed in Berlin, the same city the original song was recorded in almost 40 years prior. And unlike then, the wall separating the city was now gone. In the end, unity did really prevail. Flying Brick Wall. Flying Brick Wall is a phrase Robert Fripp used to describe the rhythm section of Wet and Bruford. This is due to their heavy, impactful, and energetic playing, being the musical version of a brick wall flying into your face. This is evident listening to albums like Starless and Bible Black and Red, where more often than not the rhythm section is dominating the rest of the band. The true impressiveness of their playing comes to light if you take a listen at some of the isolated drum and bass tracks from these songs. No wonder Fripp referred to these two as a flying brick wall, and this phrase has been used for them since. Bent Trash Cymbal. In the album Red, the cymbal has an interesting sound to it. This can most prominently be heard in the song One More Red Nightmare. Famously, this unique sound was due to the cymbal actually being fished out from the trash. Apparently, upon reaching the studio, Bill Bruford found a cymbal in the trash left by the people before. It didn't fully fit in, so the person who threw it out just kind of wedged it into the opening of the trash can, bending it in the process. Bruford took it out and used it in the recording, and the damaged cymbal created a unique sound that people still really seem to like, considering how many people talk about the effect it has. To this day, the story about the bent trash can cymbal is circulated in drummer communities. Admirable Restraint. Here we've got another story about Bill Bruford. When recording the song Trio, which can be heard on the Starless and Bible Black album, the band was performing yet another improvisational piece. As they were playing, Bruford was waiting for a good time to join in. However, he realized that the song sounded perfectly fine without drumming, so he just sat back and let the others run their course. After the others finished, they all agreed that Bruford's decision to not play drums actually contributed quite a bit to the performance, as the song was great as is, and drums probably would have ruined the sound. So despite not actually playing, Bruford was credited for the song, saying that it contributed admirable restraint. Not only does this show the band's understanding of holding back in music, it is also quite funny. I feel like Robert Fripp did take this ideology of contributing silence in his future endeavors. When watching performances from the League of Crafty Guitarists, people would notice that one of the members would just not play at all. In fact, they would often be pointed out by Fripp himself. While not confirmed, it's likely that one member is just randomly chosen each performance to exercise admirable restraint, and just listen for that time round. Or, as some have speculated, this person may have just messed up previously and was forced to sit out its punishment. Starless and Bible Black. After talking about the songs in this album quite a bit, we finally get to Starless and Bible Black itself. The album was released in March 1974 to impressive critical reception. While the album tends to be overlooked, it is still considered to be one of their most technically impressive albums and an important stepping stone to their apex, Red, which would be the album released after this. Even more impressive is how much of the album was improvised and recorded live. Only the first two songs were entirely recorded in studio. In fact, the DGM website describes the bulk of this album as a live album with all traces of the audience skillfully removed. So with that background out of the way, let's get to the songs. The album opens with The Great Deceiver, which we've already spoken about. Since interpretations of the lyrics are covered in other entries, I'll talk about the music itself. The song opens with an incredibly energetic and catchy riff, driven by the flying brick wall of Bruford and Wetton. It then suddenly comes to a halt, with everybody going completely silent except for some slow notes played by Wetton. The other instruments come in as Wetton starts singing, and it grows more energetic as it leads into the chorus. After the chorus, they repeat the same energetic opening, once again suddenly stopping except for Fripp this time. The process repeats once more, ending after the chorus. The next song is Lament. The song starts off pretty peaceful, around a minute of singing with a repeating note in the background, as guitar and mellotron join in with drawn-out notes. It then transitions into a funky rhythm section feature, which then leads into more lyrics with more aggressive instrumentals. Both the vocals and instruments increase in aggression until the very end of the song. The lyrics are from the point of view of someone who used to be a famous musician, but is now washed up. He reminisces about the better times, but still talks about enjoying the music regardless of the fame. Next up on the album is We'll Let You Know, which is just a pretty funky instrumental. Afterwards, we've got an album favorite, The Night Watch. It's a very laid-back tune, and it reminds me a lot of the song Exiles from Lark's Tongues and Aspic. The mellotron, strings, and percussion all blend together in a beautiful medley of sound, allowing Fripp's guitar to stand out even more. I guess I like this one so much because it has that medieval vibe I love so much in prog music. The song's lyrics are describing the painting by Rembrandt van Rijn. The next song is Trio, an improv we just talked about. It's a very nice, soft, and quiet instrumental. Nothing much more to say about it. Afterwards, we have The Mincer. This song was initially part of a longer improvisational piece, now known as The Law of Maximum Distress, but this was cut out afterwards, with John Wetton singing added over it. I don't have much to say about this instrumental. It sounds suspenseful, like something you'd hear in a movie when someone is sneaking around and trying not to get caught. The lyrics are also minimal and ambiguous. Fingers reaching, linger shrieking, jump at a scream, goodnight honey. You're all alone, baby breathing, they better come looking, but they don't come matter. To me, it sounds like it's describing a woman being killed in her home by a stalker. The last two songs in the album are Starless and Bible Black and Fracture, both of which are long instrumentals with similar sounds. Also, Fripp has called Fracture one of the hardest pieces he ever played, which I've already spoken about. So yeah, that's the album. I did enjoy how the songs were mostly quiet and peaceful, but in the brief moments of high energy it does get really heavy. Listening to it, you can clearly hear the musical transition between the more whimsical Lark's Tongues and Aspic and the heavier Red. One thing you may be thinking about is how the song Starless relates to the album. I mean, the main lyric of that song is literally this album's title, yet that song is on the next album, Red. Well, the song was supposed to be the child track of this album, but apparently Fripp and Bruford didn't like the version they had at that time. So the final song was delayed to the next album, while a live instrumental took up the title slot. However, I do feel like this was for the best, since Starless does fit better with Red than with the album it shares its name with. Although that does make me wonder what type of song would have closed off Red if Starless was not delayed. The Construction of Light. The Construction of Light is a studio album released in May 2000. This is by far the most overlooked and least liked studio album of the band. This album features a rather unique lineup of Fripp, Ballou, Trey Gunn on bass, and Pat Mastelotto on drums. Is this album rightly criticized, or is it underrated? Let's find out. The album starts off with Prozac Blues. Like the title suggests, the song is a blues song, although played with much heavier instruments than the stereotypical blues, creating a unique, slow grinding sound. Adrian Ballou's voice has this pitch-lowering distortion put onto it, which sounds weird initially, but it fits the song. The song's lyrics are about depression, as Prozac is a type of antidepressant drug and blues is associated with sadness. More specifically, it's about the negative feelings Ballou was facing due to criticism from fans. We see this in the opening verse, where he visits a doctor because of his depression, and the doctor tells him that he's been reading too much Elephant Talk. Elephant Talk was an online newsletter that was basically fan discussion of the band, and at the time people did not like Adrian Ballou's presence in the band, and they made it known in the newsletter. The doctor tells him not to take it too seriously, and to just take some Prozac and to drink alcohol. The third verse looks like a direct message to the fans, saying that there's really no constructive criticism they can give him to change, and that the only thing they're doing is just making him feel worse. And it seems like the fourth verse is him arriving at heaven after he dies, and even after going there, the angels tell him to take his Prozac. So yeah, this isn't a bad song in general, but it's unexpected from King Crimson. I can confidently say that it's probably the worst opener in the discography, and just from a simple Google search of the song's title you can see how hated this is. That being said, it is a funny song. Next up, we have the titular song, The Construction of Light. Although this is a great improvement over the previous song, it reminds me of the best of their 80s stuff. Already, this is a great improvement over the previous song. It reminds me of the best of their 80s stuff, as well as the best of Thrack. The first 6 minutes of the song are just some groovy instrumentals, but the last 3 minutes do have lyrics. The lyrics are quite ambiguous, with most of them being strings of random words, with a couple of understandable verses. From this, we can see what the song is about. These strings of words are about experiences of existence. Then the first 2 verses with sentences show us that the speaker feels insignificant in comparison to the scope of the universe. If there is no God, that means that we are not put here with reason, and that we are just a speck of dust within a speck of dust within a speck of dust within a speck of dust that just so happened to gain consciousness. The second verse with sentences seems to be a specific rebuke against the Christian religion. First, it says if a bird can speak, who was once a dinosaur. This is referring to the theory of evolution, which goes against what is said in the Bible. The second line mentions dogs dreaming, implying that dogs have some sort of sentience and souls. I'm not too sure about what this means, since I'm not a religious expert, but it seems to be a point of debate among some Christians if animals have souls or not. I mean, I'm sure most don't really think about this, and those that do participate in the conversation tend to be split, but there is enough of a debate to imply that there is a Christian argument for animals not having souls. So if they do, that would also go against Christian teaching. The next lines ask, should it be implausible that a man should supervise the construction of lights? What this is saying is that if the above facts go against religion, it's likely that religion is just a man-made construct. Man creating religion is what the title, The Construction of Light, refers to. Of course, this is just my interpretation of the song, and the lyrics are ambiguous enough for you to come up with your own interpretation. Next up, we have Into the Frying Pan, which is a bit heavier, with a lot of focus on the rhythm section. The lyrics here are pretty straightforward. The jaws of life chew you up and spit you back out into the frying pan. Life sucks. Next up is Fractured, which is basically a sequel to the song Fracture from Starless and Bible Black. Basically take the hard guitar part from Fracture and build an entire song around that. Then you get Fractured, a very technically impressive piece from Fripp, with the rest of the band coming in to provide the emotional punches necessary to keep the song fun. Next up, we have The World's My Oyster Soup Kitchen Floor Wax Museum, which is probably the wackiest title of any King Crimson album song. The instrumental is a slow industrial metal, but that's not the focus of the song. That honor goes to the lyrics, which is just as crazy as the title. Initially, the lyrics sound like gibberish, but once you realize that there's also wordplay involved, deciphering the song becomes a fun game. It's similar to Elephant Talk in that the lyrics' meanings is not derived from what they say, but rather from the words themselves. The majority of the song consists of common phrases linked together. The title is a great example of this. It starts off with the common phrase, the world's my oyster. That links to oyster soup. That links to soup kitchen. Then kitchen floor, then floor wax, then wax museum. Pretty fun. Next up, we have another entry in the Lark's Tongues and Aspic suite with Lark's Tongues and Aspic Part 4. You already know the drill at this point. It's the musical ideas of the original Lark's Tongues and Aspic, but reinterpreted with the sound and skill of the 2000 lineup. However, unlike the other parts of the suite, this song has lyrics. Well, this part of the song is called Coda, I Have a Dream, and was originally supposed to be a separate song, but is now currently included in Lark's Tongues and Aspic Part 4. They're pretty straightforward, listing off historical events of the 20th century, ranging from the Holocaust to the Columbine shooting. The final song of the album is Heaven and Earth from Project X. This is unironically the best track on the album, starting off with peaceful ambiance for the first minute before launching into a genuinely catchy and raw performance. The repetitive ward guitar is my favorite part of the song, followed closely by what I think is an electronic percussion section. Even under this heavy instrumental, you can hear the ambient synths clearly. Suddenly the rhythm cuts out just to leave the synths for a minute, which are gradually joined by a soft drum track and some classic Fripp guitar. What an amazing song. I cannot sing its praises enough. This is another one I'm going to put on the must-listen list. So yeah, with that being said, we finish off the album. Honestly, I don't think the songs themselves are bad. At their worst, they're mediocre, and it is at least a new sound. However, I feel like the songs don't add up to make a complete and satisfactory album. They aren't as cohesive as the other studio albums, and there's something just missing. Considering that this was during the time the band was recording their project and splitting up, it makes sense as to why it feels different from their other albums. It was produced in a very unique and tumultuous time for the band. With that being said, if this is King Crimson's worst, it just goes to show how great the band is. Also, as a little epilogue, I'll talk about the reconstruction of Light, which was a reissue of the album released in 2019. Apparently, the electronic drum parts of the original mix went missing, so Pat Mastalotto decided to just re-record drum parts on his acoustic kit. This new mix ended up significantly reworking and remastering the songs in the process, leading to what I and many others believe is just a superior result. There's a lot more depth to the instrumentals now. If this was the original studio release, I highly doubt the album would be as overlooked or disliked. Thrack. So this entry isn't actually on the Iceberg, but I decided to add it here since it's for some reason the only studio album left off. I'm assuming it was a mistake since Thrack is referenced in other entry names later down the Iceberg. But yeah, since we just talked about the two other studio albums, I might as well finish off the discography. Released in April 1995, Thrack features the absolute powerhouse double trio lineup of Fripp, Bruford, Ballou, Levin, Gunn, and Mastalotto. I know I've been using the word heavy quite a bit, but this was a studio album where the heavier sound that characterized the late 90s and 2000s King Crimson could first be heard. However, it wouldn't reach those depths quite yet, and a lot of Thrack features lighter, airier music. So, for the last time, let's look at the songs. The album opens with a track named Vroom. This is an instrumental, and many have compared it to a 90s version of Red. Starting off with some old-timey strings, the song then builds up to a proper energetic start with loud guitar. It then spends the next minute or so with a simple repetitive melody before transitioning into quiet interplay between the guitar and bass. It basically repeats this for the rest of the song. The next song is Coda Marine 475, which is basically just an extension of Vroom. Vroom directly connects to the song, and it probably could have just been incorporated into Vroom. However, it is different, with most of the song being a repetitive, simple, driving instrumental. There are technically lyrics, but they're mostly just numbers being stated, and it's less lyrics and more background vocals to give the song more texture. The next song in the album is Dinosaur, which is a fun and memorable piece. While the song is a similar instrumental as Vroom, the highlight is the lyrics. The song is pretty straightforward. It's about a man looking back on his past and cringing at his mistakes and bad decisions, wondering how he even managed to get past them. This is told through a metaphor of digging up dinosaur bones. Of course, the most iconic part of the song is Adrian Ballou basically screaming, "I'm a dinosaur," which has become a meme in the King Crimson community on the same level of I'm Wheels. Next up, we have a drastic shift in tone with Walking on Air. There is no trace of the heavy industrial rock that the previous songs in the album used, but rather a very tender and light instrumental. It certainly lives up to the name. The song sounds like you're walking on air. Once again, the song is pretty straightforward. The singer is talking to his lover. He says that as long as they're with each other, they have nothing to worry about, and together life will be as easy and carefree as walking on air. Next is Ba-Boom, a quite funky instrumental. The first minute of the song is basically just some tense string, almost like the suspenseful violin you hear in movies building up. The rest of the song is interplay between Mastalotto and Bruford, fully making use of the two drummers. The song's title sounds like the song itself. Starting off with an exotic beat, the two gradually get louder as the strings in the background get more intense too. Then the beat drops in a sense after a drum roll, and the two are just left alone to go crazy, creating great depth and textures with their drumming. However, the song in its entirety is a build-up to the title track, Thrack. Because as soon as Ba-Boom ends, Thrack comes in with an incredibly loud and punctual guitar riff. The rest of the song is a great instrumental keeping the energy of that initial riff. However, after two energetic songs, we calm down with Inner Garden 1, which features somber lyrics over a deep, repetitive, and melancholic guitar. The lyrics are about an anthropomorphic representation of autumn coming to rest in her garden, but because she's autumn, she causes all the trees around her to die and lose their leaves, which makes her cry. After that depressing song, we return to a more of an upbeat song, People. People is a contender for the King Crimson song which most closely matches the style of mainstream pop. Like, this sounds like you can hear it broadcasted on a big radio station, which is unusual for King Crimson. That doesn't mean it's bad though, it's uplifting and catchy, with a brief instrumental near the end which reaches more of a classic Crimson guitar segment, before fading out. The lyrics are simple and straightforward. They're about the myriad of different activities the people of the earth get up to in their day-to-day life. Next up on the album is a short 43-second song titled Radio 1. The song is a complete instrumental, entirely consisting of slightly distorted synths. I guess it was just added as a cool palette cleanser between People and the next song one time. I saw someone in the comments of the song compare it to the PlayStation 2's disc insertion screen, and it's funnily accurate. The next song, One Time, is definitely a vehicle for Baloo to showcase his vocals. The instrumental is simple, with soft guitar and minimal percussion, only getting a chance to flex a little in the middle of the song. I feel like the song is about trying to find stability in the mess that is life. We're assaulted by a slurry of emotions, responsibilities, and hardships that make it feel like we always have one hand tied behind our back, can't decide what to feel, and we can't even stand properly. We're always waiting for another hand to hold us stable. This song is followed by Inner Garden 2. This song is literally just an extension of Inner Garden 1, just split off and put later into the album. Next up on the album is Sex, Sleep, Eat, Drink, Dream. This song alternates between a funky and more traditional Crimson industrial instrumental. This dichotomy works surprisingly well, as the bass line acts as a connecting through line keeping it all together. The song's lyrics are mostly just the title repeated: sex, sleep, eat, drink, dream. However, there are a couple of verses which clue in the true meaning of the song. The first verse is primal, tribal, apple, egg, vegetable, eel. I have a canoe, but it does not have a wheel. The second verse is private, velvet, animal, empty TV. They're fishing in the kitchen, but still haven't caught up to me. Primal, tribal, chemical, digital night. I've got to get dressed up to go out of my mind. I think these verses are referring to the evolution of humanity. The first verse is referring to stuff associated with pre-modern humanity, living off nature in a primal way and only using simple tools. However, the second verse features stuff associated with modern humans, like TVs, chemicals, and digital technology. The line about people fishing and not catching up to me is the modern speaker referring to less advanced peoples of the past. Yet, despite the differences between pre-modern and modern humanity, when it comes down to it, we all end up doing the same things in our lives: sex, sleep, eat, drink, dream. After this, we have the song Vroom Vroom, named similarly to the opening song because they're basically the same. Vroom Vroom is just a reinterpretation of Vroom, featuring the same exact melody, but with more emphasis on an electronic and industrial tone. Similarly, the next song, Vroom Vroom Coda, is a Coda Marine 475 reimagined. However, unlike the opening two, the closing two tracks don't immediately blend into each other. Vroom Vroom ends with around a minute of silence, and Vroom Vroom Coda starts with around a minute of silence. It then launches into what is essentially Coda Marine 475, slowed down and distorted. It's honestly kind of impressive how they achieved this slow, distorted sound with their instruments. I guess they were just ahead of the curve with the slowdown and reverb trend. They literally did it to their own song in the same album. I'm not sure why they decided to end off the album with two similar songs as the openers. I think that it's because this album contains so many songs they wanted to tie it all together at the end by referencing the opening, so it doesn't feel all over the place. So that is Thrak. Honestly, it's one of their best works. The album was released after 11 years of no studio albums, so this was a grand return of the band after a decade. The album shows how much the band is willing to evolve and change with the times, featuring a drastic change in sound, similar to the change between the 1974 and 1981 albums. The album has a heavier yet more fun sound that would define the band going forward, and it still remains a strong influence well into Radcrim. This is, in my opinion, the best studio album released after Discipline, making it one of the top King Crimson albums. Very impressive. Jamie Muir. In a band which has featured a vast myriad of talented, unique, and eccentric personalities, Jamie Muir is possibly the most interesting of them all. Born in Scotland in 1942, he spent his youth pursuing the arts, specifically musical improvisation. He is a percussionist, but rarely uses a typical drum kit, rather preferring more eccentric percussion like the maracas, chimes, and saws. However, despite looking like a madman just banging on anything he could find, Muir did have a proper understanding of music and how to play with. There was a method to his madness. Fripp saw this and invited him to play for the band during the recording of Lark's Tongues and Aspic. In fact, he was the one who named the album. The story goes that after recording, Fripp asked Muir what the music sounded like. Muir responded, "Why, Lark's Tongues and Aspic? What else?" Considering Lark's Tongues and Aspic is a weird dish containing of bird tongues and gelatin, the eccentricity lines up. However, the fact that the album was named thus shows how much Fripp and the rest of the band respected him. I mean, it says something that control freak Fripp allowed this guy to run across the stage during live performances playing multiple instruments at the same time. But it also goes to show how deeply intelligent he is, with many other prog musicians citing him as a source of inspiring lessons. Right after the studio recording of Lark's Tongues and Aspic, Muir suddenly left the band. While the initial story circulated was that he injured himself on stage, Muir himself would debunk this. The real reason for his departure is that he felt the immediate need to join a Buddhist monastery and live as a monk. Muir would later come back to music, but would leave in favor of painting, which he still does to this day. Despite Muir's short time with the band, he remains one of its most iconic and beloved members. As you'll see, he appears many more times in this Iceberg. Radical action to unseat the hold of monkey mind. Radical Action to Unseat the Hold of Monkey Mind, which I will be referring to from now on as Radical Action, is a live album released in 2016. The contents of this album were taken from their live shows in 2015. This live album is special because it's basically considered the final hurrah of the band, showcasing the evolution of its sound from 1969 to the current day. Additionally, it also featured songs from across the discography, including some songs which haven't been played by the band live since the 70s. The album represents the final version of the band and the culmination of their work, as it's very unlikely that King Crimson will ever get back together to play officially, for real this time. The 2010s band's unique lineup and sound which can be heard in this album has been unofficially named after it, Rad Crim. This has already been spoken about on the Iceberg. If you were to only listen to one King Crimson live album, Radical Action would be the one to listen to. Dr. Diamond. Dr. Diamond is a live song the band played around the recording of Starless and Bible Black album. The song is energetic and almost folk at first, heavily featuring David Cross's violin. However, what stands out most about the song is how fast the lyrics are sung initially. Wetton sings it with almost no gaps between words, really taking inspiration from folk singing. However, the energy would drop on a dime, leading to a slower and heavier section, before building that energy back up. While the song had great potential for a studio release, it never ended up finalized and was just dropped. However, the song would be released as a bonus track for some releases of Starless and Bible Black, and various versions would also be released in live albums, as well as part of the KC50 series. The Law of Maximum Distress. As I mentioned in the entry about Starless and Bible Black, The Law of Maximum Distress was a live performance the band played in the lead-up to the album. A middle section of the performance was cut out and would be released from the album under the title of The Mincer. However, the backstory of the song, as told in David Singleton's KC50 commentary, is quite interesting. While looking back at the tapes of the live recording decades later, they had run into bad luck. The tape of the improvisation had seemingly ran out in the middle of the performance, with another tape picking up later in the piece, leaving a chunk in the middle missing. This situation led to the improv being called the Law of Maximum Distress, as a reference to Murphy's Law. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong at the worst possible time. However, they found a bootleg of that same show, and while listening through it, they found that it included the missing part of the improv. This missing part was clearly identified as the Mincer, which was included in the studio album way back then. So the story becomes clear. The tape had never ran out. It ran perfectly during the recording. However, when producing the Mincer for the studio album, the band had just cut out that part of the live tape, leaving the before and after behind. Decades later, the fact that they had cut out the tape was forgotten, so it was just assumed that the tape had stopped working. So with this knowledge, Singleton used the tapes, as well as the official release of the Mincer, to stitch together the complete performance, finally bringing all the parts back together. This stitched together song would then be released as The Law of Maximum Distress. Laurels. Laurels is one of the most famous memes to come out of the King Crimson community. On November 15th, 2020, Reddit user Keanu Chungus, a very wholesome name, posted this on the King Crimson Circle Jerk subreddit. It was a video which was basically a 2-minute YouTube poop of Lark's Tongues and Aspic Part 1. The shitpost music was accompanied by an altered version of the Lark's Tongues and Aspic album cover, with the sun and moon art replaced with a smiling sun emoji. This post was titled Laurels, with the same sun emoji before and after the word. Of course, the word is an altered, funny version of Lark's. For some reason, this phrase just caught on, with people spamming it everywhere under King Crimson-related stuff. It's basically become almost as ubiquitous as JoJo fans under King Crimson music. It's even been recognized by the band itself, as various band members as well as DGM Live have been documented liking Laurel's comments under their Instagram posts. Easy Money alternate lyrics. Easy Money is a song in the Lark's Tongues and Aspic album. However, it is unique in the King Crimson discography as it has changed the lyrics over the years. Of course, we already have the studio version. In the Night Watch live album, a performance of the song from 1973 can be heard, where the second half of the first verse was changed. It now reads, "Well, I argue with the judge, but that bastard wouldn't budge, 'cause they caught me licking fudge, and they never told me you were a minor." Yeah, it fits the sleazy tone they were going for, but I can see why they would not want to use these lyrics again. However, the Rad Crim iteration would once again change the lyrics, this time changing the entire song. They were changed to be about sleazy investors and bankers getting rich off of making others poor. This honestly fits the song's title even more. I don't think this performance is available for everyone online, but a snippet can be heard on the DGM website. The 30-second sample is mostly instrumental, but right at the very end you can hear the beginning of the words, "Rogue Investors." Bible Black Adult Anime. Well, we're really getting into the strange part of the iceberg now. In the year 2000, Japanese game studio Active Software released an erotic visual novel named Bible Black. This game would have a darker and surprisingly in-depth lore for an erotic visual novel, to the point where it started receiving good amounts of attention. So yeah, despite its nature as an extremely disturbing hentai, it became relatively famous because of the plot. The game would be adapted into a short anime and receive a bunch of animated spin-offs as well as a compilation movie. And apparently this compilation movie was once aired on Cartoon Network. Yeah, Cartoon Network had a thing a while back where they aired anime movies, and Bible Black was played because apparently nobody checked the contents. While only the first 30 minutes were aired, it still showed enough to probably traumatize some kids. But yeah, Bible Black, despite how disturbing it is, would become a pretty common name thrown around in the anime community in the 2000s and early 2010s. So to tie it all back together, the name of the game was inspired by the album Starless in Bible Black by King Crimson. In fact, Active Software Studios would create multiple erotic visual novels named after King Crimson albums. There was one called Discipline, which also got adapted into an anime. Of course, this is named after the album Discipline. They also created another game called Starless, also named after Starless in Bible Black. So yeah, King Crimson ended up as an inspiration for these erotic visual novels. I guess even JoJo is now no longer the most bizarre anime which references King Crimson. Vroom EP. Vroom was an extended play released in October 1994 in the lead-up to the Thrak album. The EP contains the songs Vroom, Sex, Sleep, Eat, Drink, Dream, Cage, Thrak, and When I Say Stop, Continue, and One Time. All the songs except Cage and When I Say Stop, Continue were included on the Thrak album. Cage is a fast-paced, energetic, and short song with really rapid lyrics. These lyrics are about how fears of moral decay of society cause us to build increasingly tall cages around ourselves in an attempt for protection. When I Say Stop, Continue is an instrumental which starts off as dark ambient, but gradually progresses into industrial rock. There are technically two lines of lyrics, with one telling the band to stop and the other being a countdown. Industrial Zone A-B. Industrial Zone A and Industrial Zone B are bonus tracks on the Three of a Perfect Pair album. Both are instrumentals. Industrial Zone A is short, at only around 1 minute 44 seconds. This is a pretty experimental track, with the band just playing around with sounds rather than trying to compose music. It really does sound like you're in an industrial zone, a massive, dangerous, and mysterious factory. Industrial Zone B is a bit longer, at 4 minutes 33 seconds. While the previous song sounded like a physical factory, this sounds a lot more futuristic and digital, with the main focus of the song being these electronic beepings and dronings, made unique by the heavy drumming accompanying it. Windows Vista. Windows Vista is an operating system released by Microsoft in 2006. Despite being lackluster compared to other Windows operating systems, it is well remembered for its aesthetic. Alongside its Frutiger-era visuals, its chill sound effects make it an iconic and nostalgic operating system, especially for us older Gen Z kids. Well, turns out these sound effects were composed by none other than Robert Fripp. Most well known is the startup sound. Fripp just went to Microsoft and spent some time just improvising over a traditional Frippertronics loop, while focusing on more chill and airy guitar, taking away his typical edge.
This note.
Afterwards, Microsoft went through and picked out portions of the performance to use as their sound effects. Also, another interesting thing that I found is how a sound similar to a Windows notification can be heard in the Court of the Crimson King. If you want to hear it for yourself, it's around 4 minutes 53 seconds into the song. I don't think Windows just took the sound from the song, but if it isn't just a coincidence, these similarities go to show how much Fripp's sound influenced the soundscape of our everyday lives. Like, even if we just consider the stuff he did for Vista, that work is probably his most listened music ever. Also, a funny side note, Microsoft asked Fripp to say some words about what he thinks of Vista, especially compared to Mac OS. Of course, everyone involved knew it was just supposed to be a promo, including Fripp, and it generally felt like he was just serving a nothing burger, avoiding taking a side, and just trying to say vaguely nice things about Vista. I mean, nobody's looking at Robert Fripp for advice on operating systems, but it's still funny now considering how much of a failure Vista was.
It really is very impressive to see where Vista has arrived and is going. I'm impressed. I'm very impressed with what Vista is.
It's only talk.
Elton John. In 1970, we know that King Crimson was in a precarious position. With Greg Lake thinking about leaving the band, they looked to other singers to do the vocals for the Wake of Poseidon album, and eventually they decided on this unknown singer named Elton John. Elton John was hired to come in and sing in the studio for the album, but this was cancelled last minute, with Greg Lake agreeing to record his voice. So yeah, Elton John was very close to being a member of King Crimson, which is pretty wild. It's an interesting thought experiment to think about what would have happened had Elton sung for Poseidon and also stuck around for the next few albums. Their styles are just so different that I just imagine Elton being fired for not conforming to Fripp. Honestly, while an Elton John singing in King Crimson would be cool, it's probably for the best that it didn't happen. Both parties ended up finding massive success in their own way. Earthbound. Earthbound is one of the most talked about live albums from the band. The album consists of recordings from the Islands lineup live shows in 1972 and was released in the same year. The album features 5 songs: 21st Century Schizoid Man, Peoria, Sailor's Tale, Earthbound, and Groon. While all these songs have a great energy to them, the album's sound quality is pretty horrible. The songs were all recorded with a super amateur setup, and it shows. In fact, even after the live album was created, Atlantic Records, who distributed their music in North America, just straight up refused to release it due to how bad the quality was. So yeah, it feels like just everything went wrong with this album. Poor sound quality and shaky performances from an incredibly unstable lineup made for a pretty bad debut for their live albums. The only thing worth listening to is 21st Century Schizoid Man. It has this incredible loud energy to it that you don't really see in any other versions of the song. Heaven and Earth. So this can be referring to 2 things. The first is Project X, which was one of the improv projects we talked about before. This was released in 2000. The other thing is the Heaven and Earth box set released in 2019. This is what I think the entry is talking about, as it's more significant. This box set covers basically everything between the lead up to the construction of Light and Radcrim. However, it omits the original construction of Light in favor of the 2019 reconstruction of Light we talked about, which is honestly a net gain. Of course, this also means that basically everything from the projects are included, which is pretty huge, not to even mention a bunch of other live shows from the period. So yeah, considering how experimental and unique the live stuff from this period of the band is compared to the other eras, this is definitely one of the best box sets. A Scarcity of Miracles. A Scarcity of Miracles is an album from Jaksic, Fripp, and Collins, released in 2011. While it started off as an improv session between Jacko and Fripp, it would later take a life on its own and be developed as something beyond King Crimson. The album is basically Jacko singing over Fripp's soundscapes, with some guitar and saxophone added in. It's a lot more serene than typical King Crimson stuff, lacking the edge of the band. However, the different sound is still great and makes it stand out. The album has 6 songs: A Scarcity of Miracles, The Price We Pay, Secrets, This House, The Other Man, and The Light of Day. While presented as a King Crimson project, its status as one is contested due to its difference in both production and style. Fripp himself would also distance the album from King Crimson, claiming that while it was inspired by King Crimson, it wasn't quite King Crimson. However, when the Radcrim lineup came to fruition, it was heavily derivative of A Scarcity of Miracles. The Radcrim lineup would play some stuff from this album. For example, the Radical Action album would contain a performance of The Light of Day. Barbershop is all Tony Levin. We've already talked about the King Crimson Barbershop, a comedic track which can be found as a bonus feature on the Three of a Perfect Pair album. This song is framed as an a cappella, with all 4 members of the band seemingly singing together. However, that would just be too good to be true. In fact, all the parts of the song were performed by Tony Levin. I'll give you guys some time to process your grief, but funnily enough, Barbershop is one of the better examples of Levin's singing chops in King Crimson. Braless and Slightly Slack. The band would often have parody titles that they'd use for their songs and albums among each other. For example, John Wetton would often replace Starless and Bible Black with Braless and Slightly Slack, apparently referring to a memorable woman he saw once. Another example is the band replacing Three of a Perfect Pair with Tree of a Perfect Pear, as in the fruit. It almost sounds identical, but it's still funny stuff. Collins throws Trey at Wallace. In Sid Smith's book about the band titled In the Court of King Crimson, A story about Mel Collins was shared. Apparently, when he was staying in the same hotel room as Ian Wallace while touring, he had a night terror, woke up screaming, and threw a tray at Ian Wallace. He immediately fell asleep again after this. Just an interesting story. Sacred-profane dichotomy. So I've already spoken about this extensively in both the explanation of the Lark's Tongues in Aspic and 3 of a Perfect Pair entries. It's basically about the clash between masculine and feminine energies, loud and soft, any two opposites. This is a big guiding philosophy for both these albums, and it can be seen throughout their work. Fripp screaming in Cat Food. While recording Cat Food, Fripp messed up his guitar part and let out a scream of frustration. However, instead of retaking the recording, this mistake and scream were kept in the final mix of the song. It can be heard at 2 minutes 40 seconds into the song. Wetton moons camera. In a party after one of their 70s shows, John Wetton mooned the camera, preserving an image of his bare butt for history to see. This is the censored image. I mean, the uncensored image is not disturbing or anything, but it's obviously not safe for YouTube. In the background, we can see Fripp laughing at this imagery. Nice to see some band engaging in typical rock star goofy activity for once. 1981 Apocalypse. When the Bafomundo show did an interview with John Wetton, Wetton said that a big reason for Fripp ending the band in 1974 is because he believed the world would end in 1981. Apparently he wanted to take time off to prepare for the apocalypse, and it's not really known why, and he really must have been serious about this if he was permanently disbanding King Crimson, at the time at least.
But I think the main reason that he didn't want to do it, now you've probably had this from the horse's mouth,
Yeah.
but he just is frightened that the world's going to end in 1981 or something, and so
It's already 10 after 3.
yeah,
Boy, better hurry up.
and so
Anyway.
he wanted to prepare himself for it. Now my attitude is the world may end in 1981. I could get run over this time next year, but let's get a good tour in first.
Yeah. Just in case.
Yeah.
Right.
Honestly, we can never really pin down a reason for these beliefs he had, since he never really elaborated on them, and will likely never elaborate on them for obvious reasons. However, it is worth noting that some fringe Christian denominations believe that the rapture would be coming in 1981. Most notable was the Calvary Chapel, which was an unorthodox yet decently popular church at the time, especially among younger hippie types. This church would also predict the world would end in 1981, so it is possible that Fripp believed these predictions. However, it is clear that he stopped believing in this, as he had started a new iteration of King Crimson with the release of Discipline in 1981, which he wouldn't do if he thought the end of the world was around the corner. And even if he did, he obviously wouldn't now. So yeah, despite Fripp once believing 1981 would be the end, it would actually end up being a new beginning for him and King Crimson. The League of Crafty Guitarists. The League of Crafty Guitarists is an ensemble formed from students of Guitarcraft. Guitarcraft is a set of courses aimed at improving acoustic guitar skills. Starting in 1985 under Robert Fripp, they offered classes for over 2 decades. The guitar classes were very technique-heavy and used Fripp's new standard tuning. They also offer general life improvement courses, using techniques from philosophies like Zen Buddhism to improve breathing and posture, stuff that helps with guitar playing as well as life in general. The League of Crafty Guitarists is what they call performing groups of members of Guitarcraft, specifically the group who perform with Fripp himself. They have released official music, and you can listen to some of their stuff on YouTube. Honestly, I'm not a big fan. While undoubtedly technically impressive, a lot of their stuff just feels emotionless. I guess the fact that it's just acoustic guitar and no other instruments is the reason why. The Elements. The Elements of King Crimson are a series of box sets, with one being released every year from 2014 to 2021. These box sets feature live versions, extracts, and edited versions of songs from across the King Crimson discography. Each of them would be released before a tour of King Crimson that year, made to promote the tour for that year. The only exception was a 2020 release, as there was no tour that year for obvious reasons. Elephant Talk Newsletter. In 1991, a digital newsletter named Elephant Talk was created by a person named Toby Howard. This was a community-based newsletter, allowing people to share any written content related to King Crimson. While initially distributed via an email mailing list, it would later become a proper website. Fripp himself was an avid reader of the newsletter and would often contribute entries. In 2007, after 1,251 issues, the Elephant Talk newsletter would end. This was mostly because the format was outdated and unneeded. In the early 90s, it would be difficult to find other King Crimson fans online, so creating a mailing list for people to find and share discussion and content about King Crimson was a good idea. However, by 2007, the internet was a much bigger place, and the rise of well-maintained forums, professional websites, and archival projects meant that such an outdated format was unnecessary. However, after ending the newsletter, the people in charge realized it did have a treasure trove of King Crimson content and decided to compile it all into a wiki, which is now known as the Elephant Talk Wiki. While content and information is still contributed, the vast majority of the site is just content from the newsletter categorized. This means that most of the content is focused on King Crimson before 2007. Stuff after 2007 is mentioned but tend to be empty links. The wiki is an archive of information, not only providing information on basically every song and performance of the band, but also archives of discussion about their work. It also includes references to interviews, user-submitted tabs, and a link repository to related websites. Additionally, basically all issues of the newsletter are available to read as TXT files. As stated before, the newsletter and the wiki are kind of outdated now, as there are a bunch of other, more easy-to-access resources for learning about King Crimson. However, the wiki still remains a fascinating time capsule, allowing us to peer into what the King Crimson community looked like decades ago. Thrack Attack. Thrack Attack is a live album released in 1996, which contains improvisation from King Crimson's 1995 tours. It's a bit of an infamous album due to how out there it is. It starts and ends with 2 different performances of thrack, which is fine, but basically everything in the middle is free improvisation. These performances are titled Fearless and Highly Thracked, Mother Hold the Candle Steady While I Shave the Chicken's Lip, Thrack Attack Part 1, Slaughter of the Innocents, This Night Wounds Time, and Thrack Attack Part 2. At this point, we have gone far past what the average music listener would even consider music. While there are moments of cohesion, the majority of the album just sounds like the members of the band randomly playing their own thing. Like the 70s and 80s improv we talked about would at least sound like a song, but these are more chaotic soundscapes. However, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. While I wouldn't call them misunderstood masterpieces, after listening to their entire studio discography and a bunch of their live work, including many improvs, I appreciate the ideas and styles used in these performances. But, if you put this on in front of people who have a more standard music taste, you're probably going to be getting some weird looks. It is a challenge to sit through and listen to it, but one that is worth it if you come prepared. The Deception of the Thrush. The Deception of the Thrush is a song that King Crimson would often play in the late 90s and early 2000s. The song definitely sounds like a product of its era in King Crimson, with an extremely similar style to the studio releases in The Power to Believe. While there are many versions of the song, one of the best is from the 2003 show. This song initially falls into many of the tropes we know about 2000s era King Crimson, starting off with a soundscape and leading into heavy instrumentals. However, there are vocals which are put under heavy distortion. It literally just sounds like a robot speaking. That already makes it sound unique. However, the true standout is near the end. The heavy instrumental fades out into a war guitar solo that is surprisingly tender and super beautiful. It is legitimately great and makes the whole song memorable for me. Hey Ho. At the end of Indoor Games, Gordon Haskell laughs and says hey ho. This is slightly amusing, that is all. A Voyage to the Center of the Cosmos. This was a 70s era improv done by the band. Yeah, it seems like we're just in the part of the Iceberg where a bunch of the entries are just live performances. However, after talking about a bunch of 2000 era improvs that were more experimental, it's nice listening to an older, more traditional performance. This is a nice and hefty 14 minutes long, starting off energetic and groovy, but then transitioning into a quiet middle portion, and then ending with a slower, serious, yet still energetic part. Wetton's bass really is a standout here. He's never sounded better. Suitable Grounds for the Blues. This is a song from the Radcrim era of King Crimson. The song is basically about accepting failure and a bad ending, which is reflected in the instrumental, which sounds upbeat with a darker undertone. Honestly, I'm not really sure why this was singled out for the Iceberg. The song is good, but just not memorable. Conundrum. Conundrum is a piece the band played live in 1995. It can be heard on the Vroom Vroom live album. Unlike the previous entry, this song is quite memorable for me. It's only like 2 minutes long, but the entire song consists of the drummers playing a powerful piece in unison. It seems very inspired by the drums you'd find playing in traditional Indian festivals. Nothing that really marks it as a King Crimson piece, but I guess that's exactly why it stands out a lot. They also played it right before their performance of Tela Hunjinji, and it's really cool listening to both of them together, with their drums abruptly stopping to make way for that awesome guitar riff. The Hellhounds of Krim. The Hellhounds of Krim is another live drum piece, this time played by the Radcrim lineup. I will say this is a much more textured performance than the previous one, fully utilizing the 3 drummers the band had at their disposal. Also, I read something cool about the song in an online thread regarding the title, which I would have missed otherwise. The Hellhounds of Krim are referring to the drummers. The term Hellhound brings to mind the mythical creature Cerberus, who can be found in various versions of the underworld. Cerberus is commonly depicted as a dog with 3 heads, so the 3-headed dog represents the 3 drummers of the Rad Krim lineup. Pretty cool. Breathless. Breathless is a song from Fripp's solo album Exposure. Like a lot of Fripp's work, this song is built upon Frippertronics, but unlike all the other Frippertronics work, this is a lot more upbeat and structured. A lot of other Frippertronics songs use it as a slow, ambient through line to improv over, but this one starts off with a fast-paced trill, which leads into a powerful guitar, assertive drumming, and a groovy bass line, keeping that energy going throughout the almost 5-minute runtime. All the while, the Frippertronics loops keep fading in and out, acting as punctual accents to the awesome playing, before continuously droning and trilling in the background, adding to the powerful symphony. As with the entire Exposure album, this song was certainly trying to go for a more pop-rock feel, and that style, performed with Frippertronics, makes for an awesome combination. Many people see this song as an unofficial part of the King Crimson discography, with many comparing it to songs like Red, The Lark's Tongue Suite, and Fractured. It would become an official part of the discography when the Rad Krim lineup performed it live. Honestly, it's still a great performance, but I do like the original studio version better. The Frippertronics are more pronounced in that. Also, I don't dig the saxophone in the live version, sadly. Song prototypes. Of course, as with any band, King Crimson had prototypes of songs which they'd finished a rough draft of, but didn't completely finish yet. Of course, many of these prototypes are actually live songs which would later be refined in a studio release. I'll provide some of my favorite examples. First is A Man, a City, a song played live in 1969. This track can be heard of as a bonus track on In the Court of the Crimson King album. This is a prototype of what would become Pictures of a City, released on the next studio album In the Wake of Poseidon. We already talked about Mars, which is another 1969 live song, which is technically a prototype of what would be the Devilish Triangle, also on In the Wake of Poseidon album. Another example of a prototype is Dangerous Curves, played in 2001. This version of the song can be heard in the KC50 collection, and is a prototype of the final version of Dangerous Curves, released in the Power to Believe album in 2003. I do low-key like this more rougher version of the song more than the studio version though. Travel Weary Capricorn. Travel Weary Capricorn was a song the band played live in 1969. It starts off with a slow-paced, whimsical portion. Honestly kind of reminds me of something Jethro Tull would put out. However, it immediately launches into a fast-paced, jazzier instrumental. The highlight here is Ian MacDonald absolutely shredding it on the flute. This performance can be listened to on the Epitaph live album. Get Thy Bearings. Get Thy Bearings is a song by the artist Donovan, released in 1968. It's a typical short but sweet jazz piece. King Crimson would cover the song soon after in the 1969 live shows. This version of the song is longer and definitely more bombastic. Most notable is the changed saxophones. While the saxophone was prominent in the original, it was still somewhat restrained there. However, there is no restraint in King Crimson's version, with the saxophone going all out. In fact, this riff would later be reused in the song Pictures of a City. Like the previous entry, Get Thy Bearings can be heard on the Epitaph live album. I Talk to the Wind is a Gods, Gods, and Fripp song. So yeah, Gods, Gods, and Fripp, the precursor band to King Crimson, were actually the first to create the song I Talk to the Wind. Their version of the song is much more upbeat and whimsical, albeit with a sad undertone. The lyrics were also sung faster and more upbeat, with the singer Judy Dibble contributing her voice. I like this version more than the one on In the Court of the Crimson King. It's just more of a pleasure to listen to. The later King Crimson members modified the song to make it more somber, and probably to also simplify the bass line for Greg Lake to play while singing. This version of the song was actually quite obscure for a while, as it wasn't released by Gods, Gods, and Fripp. It was released in A Young Person's Guide to King Crimson in 1976. A full release of the GG&F album, The Brondesbury Tapes, occurred in 2001, where the song could be heard as well. However, the most accessible way to listen to the song is through the KC50 collection on YouTube. Fractured is harder. In a previous layer, we talked about how hard the song Fracture is. Well, Fractured is naturally harder, basically taking the hardest part of Fracture and extending it to a full song. Nothing much more to say here. Great Deceiver is about the commercialization of religion. This is the theory about Great Deceiver's meaning that I believe in, and is likely closest to the truth. This is that the song The Great Deceiver is about how religion has turned from what should be a humble moral guide to a massive grift to gain money and power. Religion is a great deceiver, with powerful religious figures telling the masses to listen to them and to give them money in exchange for a perceived moral superiority. This theme was apparently inspired by Fripp's trip to the Vatican. There he saw common commodities being sold in the streets to tourists alongside religious souvenirs. This was likely the inspiration for the lyrics cigarettes, ice cream, figurines of the Virgin Mary, Cadillacs, blue jeans. The other lyrics can also allude to religion deceiving people. For example, take the verse, "There's a shoeshine boy with a gin shop slag. She raised him up, she called him son, and she canonized the ground he walked upon." This could also be interpreted as saying that religious leaders take ordinary, everyday things and people and falsely glorify them as being of divine origin. There's also the verse, "In the night, he's a star in the Milky Way. He's a man of the world and the light of day. A golden smile and a proposition. And the breath of God smells of sweet sedition." This also goes to show how religious figures make people think that they're divine, cosmic people, but in reality they're just normal people who are charismatic and win people over using sweet seditions, telling them what they want to hear. This seems like it's true to me. Mantra. Mantra is yet another King Crimson piece from 1969, which can be found in the album Epitaph. This is a slow-paced, mystical instrumental. Essentially, the entire song is the band supporting a flute performance. It's a pretty interesting song in the discography, especially since it comes so early in the band's history. The court-era live performances are interesting and unique compared to the rest of the band, yet tend to be severely overlooked due to how early on and rough these pieces are. In the Court of the Crimson Queen. In the Court of the Crimson Queen is an album released by Toya Wilcox in September 2008. Of course, the title is a reference to her being the wife of Fripp. If Fripp represents King Crimson, Toya would be the Crimson Queen. The album has a similar pop rock style as Toya's other work. There have been several reissues in the years since, with the most recent being in 2023. This edition of the album has 16 tracks, several of which feature Fripp on guitar. So that is it for the part 2 of the King Crimson Iceberg. The original plan was to include another layer in this part, but the script is already over 60 pages long, and including more would be overkill. Part 3 will be the final part of the series, finishing the iceberg. Although it will be more work than expected, I don't think it will take too much time since we're done with all the mega entries of the albums, and the rest of the entries in the iceberg are either just individual songs or short fact entries. Also, I do want to finish this project soon so I can move on to other things. So make sure to stick around for the third part of this perfect pair. If you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you soon.